All right, welcome. So I am going to walk you all through how to paint a watercolor version of this beautiful moth. I have done the really basic preliminary sketch just to kind of get like my layout, but I wanted to do part of my sketching on camera or on video. If you want to just focus on the painting, you could just fast forward. But what I've done is just really lightly sketched. And now this is kind of like just basic sketching, and now I'm analyzing the shape a little bit more. And I think it's really important when you're painting to have a solid foundation of drawing. So even if you're tracing, I know with watercolor and other mediums folks trace, and I don't think there's anything wrong with tracing as long as you're not tracing someone else's painting. But the issue is you miss little details. So for example, right now I'm just coming in and I'm adding kind of a almost lightly scalloped shape to the bottom of the wing. It's not perfectly smooth. It's not really, wavy. I'm just coming in and adding just a little texture. So basic sketch in the beginning is what I do to help get my scale, make sure things are kind of in proportion. But now I'm going back in and I'm trying to sharpen things up and add more interest and get more of the little, details, the little shapes. So for example, these cute little legs, they're almost broken up into segments. 1 segment, 2 segment. So I'm going to kind of sketch that in. Here's one little segment and another. And for me, I bounce around my painting quite a bit, whether it's painting or drawing. And you'll see that the more if you watch, multiple videos. So I started on the wings, and I'm kind of going over to the head, and I'll kind of bounce back around. But here's where we're at so far. Getting a little bit more interest in there. So a lot of the times I notice people will ask with watercolor, is it okay to have pencil marks? And watercolor is transparent. I'm going to scoot this up a little bit as I sketch. So yes, you will see your pencil marks. I have a few tips. One, you can definitely just erase. So see, basic shape, and then I'm kind of just making sure I have the interesting flowing curve in there. So you can erase things. Even if you sketch kind of dark, you could take an eraser afterwards and just kind of lighten up your lines if you're worried about it. You can also just make sure that where you have darker pencil lines is mainly going to be in your darker parts of the painting. So for example, in an area of my painting, there's some sort of bug that's loud. When a lighter area of my painting, I'm just going to try to keep really light pencil lines. Another thing I like to point out when it comes to pencil lines and watercolor is that I find if you go to any museum or gallery where there's really just amazing watercolorists, either professional or these famous people, you can see their pencil marks. And I don't think that is a negative thing, but I like to almost point it out or think about that, because it's just a reminder that it's kind of part of it. So like Georgia O'Keeffe, for example, she wasn't necessarily known for watercolor. She was more known for oil, but I saw some of her watercolors at the Seattle Art Museum a while ago, and a few other really great watercolorists. And you can just see their pencil lines, and it's like no big deal. I would never stand back there and think, oh my gosh, how embarrassing. It's like, it's just kind of part of it. So don't stress too much. So again, just kind of sketching in my basic shape. We have these great like curving lines in the wings. I hold my pencil pretty loosely. I try not to be too tight, like I'm writing a letter, a little bit further back, kind of quicker, almost choppier line work. I also think before I'm doing a watercolor, how much of this do I want to pre-sketch? Sometimes I want precision and I want things to be in a certain place. Like for this moth, I do want some semblance of symmetry, right? It doesn't have to be perfect, but I do want things to be slightly symmetrical. So I'm thinking I do want quite a bit of sketching because it's going to allow me to kind of make changes. Like for example, if I was just doing this with a brush, I couldn't really make a lot of changes, but because I'm using a pencil, I can go back and kind of tweak things. But just sketching in loosely those veins and the wings, I find it's really helpful to allow yourself the freedom to kind of make changes while you're painting. So that being said, I try not to over sketch. So yes, I want basic shapes so I know where things are going to go, but I think this is going to be pretty great. Later, I'll probably do some lines or more vein work in the wings. Again, I take an eraser like this. Any eraser is fine. This is literally just from Daiso, like a dollar store, or this. And I just lightly skim over some of my pencil lines that might be a little bit dark, or for example, maybe in areas of the painting that are going to be really light. So the body looks like a lighter yellow. I don't necessarily want super dark lines. That being said, to clarify, I'm not erasing my lines here. I'm just lightening them up a little bit. So I'm going to hold this. Feel free to pause and screenshot at this point if you want a nice clear image, or you can also pause and screenshot this just to give you an idea of what we're doing. Now I'm going to move this out of our way and I'm going to mix up some puddles. So here is my watercolor palette. It's very well used, I like to say. It's well loved, as watercolor palettes should be. I'm going to pre-mix a little bit of colors, and then while I'm painting, things are going to just ebb and flow and shift. I am going to use a medium size brush like this Holbein Gold size 8. It's really great because it has a good tip to it, but it still holds a lot of water. And I'm going to kind of pre-plan my colors, but again, not perfectly. I'm going to allow myself to make some changes. First off, we have this amazing green. And when I think of green, one of the things I like to think to myself is it more of a yellowy green or a blue green? So to me, this is quite a yellowy green. It leans more towards the yellow family. So knowing that, I want to go for kind of a warmer green and maybe even add yellow to it. So one of my favorite colors is Holbein Olive. It's honestly probably perfect just by itself. And I do love the look of that. It's a very yellow green. So I'm taking a bit of water and I'm just scrubbing the surface of my dried paint and I'm just mixing a puddle. For those who may not painted much before, know that this is the consistency you want. You want lots and lots of water. So I know for me, although this is quite a yellowy green already, I'm probably going to want some fun changes to this as I paint. I may want to add a little yellow, I may want to add a little blue. I want some changes. So in the body, I also have yellow. I'm going to clean my brush and I'm going to grab one of my go-to yellows. I forget the name off the top of my head, so I do apologize for that, but it's a Holbein yellow, just one of the basic yellows. It's not really warm, really cool. Let's call it maybe lemon. I don't know. Please forgive me. So yellow is going to have multi-purposes. I can mix it with the green to make even more of a yellowy green. I can use it by itself. It looks like it's going to kind of flow in here. And we're going to add a little bit of pink throughout. So it's also going to help bridge the gap between pink and green. So pink and green, when they come together, they'll most likely make brown when you're painting. But yellow mixes great with green. Yellow mixes great with pink. It's going to be our buffer color that we're going to talk more about later. But just a thought that this is a good yellow that can mix with pink. It can mix with green. So I'm loving that so far. Instead of mixing 20 different puddles, I plan on just kind of letting these change as I paint, if that makes sense. Get some dog hair out of here. Oh well. So we have green and we have yellow. Next, I'm going to grab some pink. Opera pink is a go-to really vibrant color. Again, pretty much everything I'm using today is Holbein watercolor, unless I maybe specify otherwise. So opera is very, very pink, and I think it maybe is almost too bright in a sense for some of this. So I think I might take also a little bit of like a, I think this may be crimson or carmine, something like that, something slightly more reddish. A little bit more of a slightly natural color. This is kind of unnatural, which is beautiful, but I think when these two come together, they'll feel a bit more what I'm looking for. Yeah, that's beautiful. Little bit of purple, and I think I'm going to be done for my first base layer once I get some purple in there. Purple's always a fun one. I love taking, my go-to is taking a little bit of French ultramarine, which is a very beautiful blue, and a little bit of any red. So let's just maybe use the same red. So one of the reasons why I like to mix my own purple often is because I like very minimal colors when I'm painting. I find it also is very helpful when I'm teaching because I think a lot of folks can get overwhelmed with all these different colors. So later on, if I want to kind of add a little bit of a blue to my green, I have French ultramarine that I'm already using elsewhere. I think we can just kind of tie things back together, which is great. And mixing your own colors, you can get a lot of variety. So let's jump into our base layer. If at any point during these videos, you know, this is a video, not a live, so feel free to pause, take a break, mix your puddles, but I'm going to just jump right back into my painting. All right, I'm going to start with my base layer here. So what I'm going to do is take a slightly larger brush. I have this silver black velvet 1-inch cat tongue. It's a lot of words, but basically it's 1 inch thick. It is just a slightly larger brush. And I'm going to do a technique called wet on wet. So I'm pre-wetting the space. Now keep in mind, every time you watch someone else paint, that is their specific style. So what I'm not trying to do here is perfectly copy this moth. I'm just creating a visually interesting, fun painting of it. Sounds very obvious, but sometimes it's nice to remind yourself that you are creating a painting of something. You don't have to copy things perfectly. Allow yourself some freedom to make changes. Now my water is a tiny bit dirty. I was painting before I started this, but it's not too dirty to where I think it's going to really affect my colors, but you can kind of see that slightly gray tone. I know some people are real sticklers about that. I am not. For me, it's just helping me see just how wet everything is. So I am using Arches Rough 140 pound paper. Professional brand paper that can hold quite a bit of water, and I'm pre-wetting this. The reason why I'm pre-wetting is to allow for blending. Now notice where the lamp or the light hits this, just how wet everything is. It's not necessarily puddling, but it's very wet and shiny. Can't really get away with these techniques as much with cheaper paint, but what I want is a base. So I'm going to come up here and I am going to get a little bit of my basic green. So here is my brush, my medium brush, and my lovely green. And I'm going to start doing little downward brush strokes. So if I'm doing this correctly, things should kind of spread out. Spread, spread, spread. I shouldn't be getting any hard lines. See how wet that is? I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And if you have taken a class with me before or anything like that, you'll know that I love layering. Right now is just my first layer. I find it very helpful and less stressful to think of it that way. We're just starting with layer 1. So we're letting things kind of ebb and flow and bleed. I started with green. I am going to get a little bit of my yellow as well. And this yellow is going to give me a nice kind of yellowy tone to the body here. So when I pre-wet something, I know going into it, I'm not going to get hard lines. So I'm not trying to force that. I'm not switching gears here. My goal right now is for blending and bleeding and a base layer. So I have green, I have a little bit of yellow. Maybe a little bit of yellow in the body. Where else do I see yellow? I see a little bit more on like the tips of these really fun, what are these even called? Are these their own wings in a sense? I don't know. Let me know in the comments below. Let me know. I have no idea. All right, so we're getting this fun blend, nothing too detailed, nothing too crazy, but what we do have is a perfect equal wetness. Do you see how nothing is dry, nothing is puddling, everything is just kind of even? Beautiful. I'm not overthinking this, I'm not overstressing. Here's a little bit of my pink, and I'm just kind of dropping in a little bit. One thing I find that newer painters can sometimes struggle with when it comes to watercolor and when it comes to wet and wet is the amount, how much water to use. So right now my paper's wet, which means what's on my brush doesn't need to be fully loaded. If it did, if I took a brush full of water, it would just bleed everywhere. It's kind of just like, I don't know, physics. It would bleed. So because my paper's wet, I can kind of rely on that to obviously add water, right? I'm taking a little bit of water and kind of blending this out. I'm not getting the perfect look yet, but I am starting a really great base that I'm liking. So again, my paper's still wet. So when I go to grab water or grab color right now, I'm not using a really, really fully loaded brush of water. I just have a little bit here. Things are starting to dry a little bit, and I know that because it's not bleeding as much. So it might already be time to take a break and blow dry. My wings are still pretty wet. I think I could maybe do a tiny bit more. So I think I'm gonna do that and then I'll quit while I'm ahead. So still damp, I'm gonna do a little bit of yellow. If at any point you need to stop and blow dry, feel free. You can always blow dry and then pre-wet again. So I have yellow on the wings. I'm gonna add a little bit of pink. I'm gonna kind of drop it in there. So I mentioned before, pink and green are going to come together and create something kind of muddy, whereas pink and yellow will work great together, create almost a semi kind of orangey tone, if quite possibly. So what I'm doing is I'm letting everything have its own space to a point. And I'm not overworking things together. I dropped colors in, and I think this is perfect for my base layer. I'm not expecting hard lines, I'm not expecting perfection, but what I do have, again, is a great base that I can work on. This is where a lot of artists or newer painters might go wrong. You might keep touching, keep tweaking, and then you get blooms and things spread. While everything is still kind of equal wetness, I'm going to take a brief break. I'm going to pause, I'm going to blow dry, and I will come back and finish my next layer with you. All right, so I just went ahead and blow dried my painting. You can see that the shine is gone. So I recommend having a blow dryer to lock in that layer, and now we can build on it. I'm going to do another similar layer where I'm still letting things kind of blur together, and I'm thinking about my goals for every layer. My first layer, I got this wonderful base layer. I was able to just set the basic tones, almost like I'm ignoring the thin, fine line details, what's underneath all of that. So what I'm missing now is I want to build up vibrancy. With watercolor, you can always go darker, you can always go brighter, but you can't really take it back. So it doesn't hurt that it's not overly bright yet. So I want to add some purple tones near the top of the head and down the curving wings. Maybe start adding some color to these fun little circular shapes, maybe brightening up the pink. But I'm still blending. I'm still not to that really detailed layer. Almost everything I paint personally has around 3 to 4 layers to it. I find that it really helps kind of work on, or helps you build on your blending. So some areas I want really blended, some areas I want harder lines, and you get a really great balance. So let's jump in with a little bit of that purple. Like I mentioned earlier, I have a red, I believe it's crimson. Sorry if it's not that exact color. Doesn't matter too much. A little bit of French ultramarine in there also. So just get a nice purple. What's nice again about mixing my own is I can make it more pink sometimes, more purple, things like that. So now my paper is dry. Again, my paint is wet. So this is called wet on dry. So here's a bit of a lighter purple. So now that my paper is dry and I'm working wet on dry, things aren't going to blend as seamlessly or as easy for me. There's nothing wrong with that. You could continue working wet on wet if it works better for you. But I do like the control I'm able to get when I'm working wet on dry. So before this dries on me, that's just a little base of purple. I'm going to add a little bit, and then I'm going to start taking water and kind of blending it out. So I am still going for a blended look in this layer, but a slightly more controlled blend, if that makes sense. Before, when I dropped things in, I was just kind of starting with a base layer. But now, because it's wet on dry, I'm able to direct the water and direct the blending a little bit more where I want it. A little bit less at the whim of the water. So I'm outlining the wings just slightly. Keep in mind that, again, watercolor paper can hold a lot of water, so don't be afraid to really, if you're going to blend something, it's okay to add a bit of water. So my main tip for blending is just using water. I added some purple. I just take water and I'm kind of softly pulling at that edge. And I know it's repetitive when I say this often in classes or in these videos, but this is just one of the layers. I find that sometimes it's easy to get almost like stressed out with this idea that it has to be perfect, it has to look a certain way right away, but really, it's okay. This is just the first step. The second step, we can always build on it. So I'm taking a little bit of that fun pinkish color, and I'm going to add to these little legs here. Now I could add this later. This is slightly more detailed, but look, sometimes my brain just wants to start building. Start adding a little bit of detail almost, or start at least making things look the way I want it. Cute. I'm gonna give the purple just a minute to kind of dry. That's why I'm not working right next to that right now. So we're still going for a base, but we're adding a little bit more color where we want pops of color a bit more. So for example, in these areas that I always think look kind of like eyes, and if I'm not mistaken, they're supposed to look like eyes, kind of, right? To scare predators, maybe. So I'm adding some, it looks like there's maybe pink and orange. So I have some yellow from earlier. Maybe I'll get a little bit more of that and a hint of the pink to create a slightly more orangey tone. Mixing colors together. So there's hard outlines around everything. I'm not getting to that yet. I'm thinking what else is almost underneath all of that. There's a little bit of an orange. Just one of my basic oranges on my palette. Any orange is fine, but just pop in a little bit of that in there. So far, so good. Just slowly building up. So I want a little bit more vibrancy. I do like how this olive green turned out, but I'm feeling like I still want it to be a little bit brighter. Keep in mind that watercolor, as a general rule, dries almost 3 times lighter than when it's wet. So this is olive green, and you can see that there's quite a bit of water there. It's shiny. So because it dries lighter, sometimes the color looks great when it's wet and then it dries and you're like, I could use a little bit more. I could use a little bit more vibrancy. So I'm adding a nice watered down olivey green here, maybe even a little bit of yellow. I know it's a yellowy green, but part of me does want to add a little bit of blue to it just to break it up a little bit. I have cerulean. I think I might take just a hint of cerulean, because it's not a really strong blue, and just add a little bit of that in here. Now this is where things can become our own as opposed to just being like the photo reference. In my head, I just was thinking about how I wanted more variety in that wing, in that green. So I'm kind of blocking in some of the color there. Now, for me, I don't want this to be too hard of a line yet with my style of watercolor. A lot of my hard lines comes with white. So for me, I like to take water and just kind of bleed things out. So yes, I was blocking in this section, but I don't want it to feel so blocky, if that makes sense. I want it to feel kind of blurred. So I'm going to keep going with that. So I've watered down olive. And if you can kind of see where the light catches that, it's almost puddling. There's quite a lot of water here. So because I'm working wet on dry, I don't have the wet paper anymore to almost fall back on, in a sense. I have to use enough water right now because there's no water on my paper. There's a little bit of blue. So although I'm adding lots of variety, I'm not trying to have each color stand out a lot, like directly blue wings or completely yellow. I like where things are kind of merging. So right now I'm just looking at the two, wondering if I need more variety, maybe a little bit more blue here or there. So I like the color that's happening. Again, I'm going to clean my brush and I am going to just lightly blur these edges. Now, when I'm blending and blurring is another chance for me to just soften. What I'm not trying to do is completely take away what I just did before. So one helpful tip I find is that the amount of water you should be using here. So if you notice, I'm using my napkin or paper towel more often. I'm just kind of lightly pulling at the edges, but I don't necessarily need a ton of water. So far, so good. So I'm just building. I'm going to get slowly higher contrast as I go. I'm just starting lightly. In the body here, we have this almost fluffy texture here and some curving shapes as well. So I'm going to start working on the body and then into these bottom wings. Again, forgive me if they're not wings, but tail? I don't know. We're just going to call it whatever we want. You'll know what it is. All right, so I have a little bit of this orange that is my go-to. It is a Holbein color, but I cannot remember the exact color off the top of my head. But what I want is a slightly more orangey yellow, a warmer yellow, if you will. So I've been using this yellow, and I just added a hint of orange to it to give it some warmth. I think that'll be a nice balance in this painting. There's a lot of cool tones, and I think a warmer yellow will be really nice here. So I have a slightly orangey or warm yellow, and I am going to just do downward brush strokes with the tip of my brush, like this, to give it a slightly fluffy effect while also brightening this color up. I can always make it choppier. I can always add more hard lines. I can't really take those out, so it doesn't hurt to kind of blur a little bit of that out as well. So visually, I'm kind of blending this orangey body into the yellowy body there. And then we have this slightly striped look going down. So we have a reddish pink. So my petals are just always revolving or evolving, both. They're always changing. The same pinkish red I've been using on and off. I'm going to just suggest some stripes here. Now again, I'm just having fun with my own painting, so what I'm not going to do is overly obsessed about each little stripe here. Personally, I'm just sketching in downward choppy brush strokes to just suggest. Doesn't have to be perfect. There we go. Using a little bit of water by itself just to blend and blur, and I think that's turning out great so far. This is the part of a painting where it can start to feel like an awkward teenager phase. It, to be honest, doesn't look that great, but it will, and I know where it's headed. We're missing, you know, some of the vibrancy, some of the contrast, but so far, so good, right? So I'm going to show you how to keep building layers, add more detail, maybe even add a shadow at the end. So just stick with it. I'm going to take a little bit more of this orangey yellow, and while I have that on my brush, I think I'm going to create, let me zoom, a slightly more detailed antenna here. So we have this curving shape, and I'm going to flick off from that to create a slightly fluffy or feathered look. So nice and choppy there. My dog just started snoring, so I do apologize if that comes through. All right. So I've done a lot of small little steps here, and I'm just going to work now here. What I see in the photo reference is that we have almost our brightest pink, really dark, nice and vibrant, a little bit of yellow, and some almost blackish green as well. So this is only layer 2. I'm not going fully detailed yet, but I do want to add more of that vibrancy. So I'm personally going to take a bit more of that pink. I mentioned I'm using opera pink and maybe a hint of a red to tone it down a touch. This puddle has still a good amount of water in it. And I'm going to work similarly to how I did before. So I know I paint pretty quickly, and just a reminder that you can always slow down and paint at your own pace. I think it's easy when you watch other people's videos to think you gotta keep up, but that's kind of the fun part of a video. You can always do things however you need at your pace. I just don't have the attention span to paint slowly. So I've filled in some of the areas where I want it to be bright pink. I'm gonna grab water and blend this out. I like concentric circles oftentimes when I'm doing blending, but it's up to you how you blend. And then it's almost going to become a version of wet on wet because now this whole section is wet. I'm going to grab a bit of my green from earlier, the olive. Maybe drop a little bit of that in here. And because I don't necessarily want my pink and my green to fully mix, I'm dropping the green into the blended out section. So I'm not dropping it right into the pink. This was almost kind of a yellowy tone. Then I'm taking a clean brush and I'm just encouraging those two colors just to kiss, just to barely touch. I'm gonna grab kind of a new color coming in here, but this is ivory black. I'm just gonna get a little bit of it. Doesn't necessarily need to be a lot. I'm just gonna kind of gray down just a little bit in here. I think after this will be a perfect time to blow dry again, and we'll keep moving forward after this. So I'm dropping in just a little bit of black. Things are starting to dry on me. I think this is a perfect opportunity to blow dry, take stock of where we're at, and then we'll move on together after this. All right, so here's where we ended after I blow dried. We still are missing some of the really dark colors, really vibrant, and then some of the fine lines, obviously. So I'm gonna do 2 more layers, one more starting the detail, and then a final layer with some white highlights, which is just my personal style. So I'll be using this acrylic ink for some highlights. I've also decided I wanna do a drop shadow to make it look like it's kind of laying on the ground or table or something and it's coming off, so I'll be adding a bit of a shadow. So why don't we do that now? We can do the shadow now and then kind of add the details on top. My go-to shadow color is usually a light purpley gray. I have this lavender color from Holbein that I think is really beautiful. Sometimes it's just a little too purple for just a shadow, so I'll pull in maybe just a little brush stroke of an ivory black, just a little bit of black for more toned down, kind of muted purple, and just make sure it's nice and watered down. So because I'm making up this shadow, it's not really there. I'm just going to imagine that the sun is coming from a certain direction. Let's say it's coming from, usually I find it helpful to go from an angle, not necessarily straight back. So let's say the shadow is coming from here. If I like to imagine a straight line diagonally across my paper, or if the sun was coming from here, whatever it is, just a line across. If the sun is coming here, then the shadows would follow that same angle. So I'm going to take this really watered down color and imagine that there's a shadow kind of coming here. I think it's also really important to note just how wet this is. It's going to help it look more transparent, which looks more like a shadow. If you think about how the wings are overlapping each other, I'm adding my shadows to areas that would be overlapped as well. So it might get a little bit more dramatic off to one side like this. And I'm layering on top of these smaller wings so that it looks like this is on top. And I often like to do this earlier on so that my detail and my fine lines can lay on top of this. So this is kind of showing that the wings are laying down. And if anything is lifted off of a surface, it's kind of floating. Like, let's say this edge, these little edges, they maybe flip up. They're not actually touching the ground or whatever it's on. It also would not be touching the shadow. So for example, see this little tip? If it's lifted off of the surface it's sitting on, then there would be a gap between object and shadow. And I could see that happening with this. And it maybe looks like I'm just making this up, and to a point I am, but I'm also just mirroring the shape. So I'm just trying to do a similar curve, a similar shape. And again, it's made up, so I'm not too concerned about copying anything perfectly. Maybe I'll add just a little hint of a shadow for some of these little legs. If you think that the little tip of the leg would probably be touching the ground, but maybe the other parts of the legs might not be. Really strong shadows behind me, sorry about that. So I think that looks really good for now. Maybe I would tweak it later if something bothers me, but I like that it's not super dark, so I could go over it if I wanted to darken it. I could kind of tweak things, but I'm pretty happy with that. It's going to make it look a bit more three-dimensional there. So now that I've done my shadow, I'm going to continue to use this brush, but I also have a smaller brush, this size 2 Holbein liner brush. I think liner brushes are great because they still hold quite a bit of water. A liner basically just means it's long and skinny, so it holds a lot of water, holds a lot of color, and then I can use that. So I'm going to go in with more of my purple again. I just want to darken it up a little bit, go a little bit more bold with it. And now I'm slowly, now that this is my third layer, adding more bold color, more dramatic. Might even add a little bit of gray to it. So now I have this mixture of pink, blue, and gray, just to make a really dark purple for a few hints in the moth that will be a bit more dramatic, a little bit more bold. And I'm just looking at my photo reference briefly, but then I'm mainly just focusing on my painting. I also find when I'm using a photo reference, I'm not just making something up, I try to just use it briefly. Sometimes we can overthink a painting because we're trying so hard to kind of copy a photo, but that's not really my style. I love the freedom of making things my own. So I'm focusing on my painting, not just the photo reference. I'm sketching in some darker purple here and then kind of blending it out a little bit. You can see with that sun behind me, it's a bit more vibrant. I find it helpful to think of the layering process as slowly filling in less and less, in a sense. In the beginning, I kind of painted everything. In the second layer, I painted quite a bit, and now I'm just only adding little pieces. But it's getting more bold, which I like. So I have that pink from earlier, opera pink and red. And again, just kind of looking at the photo reference where I maybe want a bit more pop a little bit more bold colors. And I'm just using that small brush to add a few touches. Maybe a bit more of that purple up here as well. I'm just building on things. We oftentimes can overwork things, I think is such a big issue in watercolor. So I'm focused on just adding little bits, and then I step back, see what I'm thinking, how I'm feeling, how things are blending, how not just this one little section looks, but how it all kind of flows together. Like for example, I noticed there's a bit more pink down here. So I'm almost outlining this, but I'm making sure to use enough water so that I can also blend it out a bit. Cleaning my brush off, taking just water and kind of softening that edge. A small brush like this isn't ideal for blending, but since it's such a small area of blending, it works pretty well. Like if this was a larger space, I would switch brushes. So I want it to feel outlined, but also kind of a soft outline. And I'm just going to keep working on this. Please let me know if you have questions in the comments. I've done a lot of live classes, a lot of in-person classes, but I haven't really done a lot of videos like this where I don't have folks asking questions during. So please feel free to ask questions and I'll get back to you. All right, so just kind of blending. I lost a little bit of the yellow there, so I might add a little bit more back in. Drop that in. Beautiful. You can see how watercolor was just really meant to be layered, how the vibrancy really comes out with those multiple layers. Beautiful. So I'm going to continue this process, slowly sharpening things. I think I'm going to add a little bit more of that pinkish red around the edges here. Also notice if you have a liner brush, can you really use it to your advantage by loading up the entire brush, not just the tip of it, but really getting your whole brush kind of loaded. It's really the point of these liner brushes. And then I'm just coming in here and slowly outlining. And notice how I'm not doing a large section at a time. I'm just doing like one wing and then blending, and then another section and blending. Otherwise, this is just gonna dry on you and you won't be able to blend it out. And I'm going for a balance of a little bit of an outline, but not such a bold outline as that. Although that does look pretty nice actually, now that I see it. But my plan was to just soften just a little bit. So just a little bit of water and a balance where, yes, it's a hard line, but it's a little bit more almost smudged. Some lines I want more bold and more harsh, some I want just a little bit of a blend on. If you're finding that things are stuck and you can't blend them, I give myself something to blend. So for example, I'm going to drop in a little bit more pink. So my pink is wet again, and then switch over to water. So I have something to blend. I'm not just trying to blend dried color. And start to see the big difference. One thing that I love about watching other people paint is you can see, when you can see the process, I think it helps build confidence to trust the process, if that makes sense. For example, if you get to a point in your painting that you don't really love and then you just kind of get discouraged, that's not helpful, you may not pick up a brush again, but just pushing through the first kind of awkward layers that maybe don't look amazing, and seeing how people fix mistakes, or you know, just taking your time on things makes such a big difference. I didn't love my first and second layers, but I trusted the process, and now I'm starting to like it quite a bit more. Again, if it's not blending out as much as you want it, just give yourself a little bit more color, give yourself something to blend with instead of fighting the watercolor. Sometimes as things dry, it's kind of tricky to blend, so kept it wet, added a little bit more color. You can always switch brushes if it helps, like I said. Like coming over here, this might help a little bit more. And now I'm getting more of that pop. Going back to the photo reference, it may not have that bright of a pink around the outside of the real Moth, but I love vibrancy, so I'm kind of doing my own thing a little bit there. All right, I'm focusing on one color, just adding pink to areas that need it. I feel like I could add a little bit more maybe in the body, almost purpley tone. It's kind of dark there. Just suggesting some stripes. So if you're ever lost in a painting thinking, where do I even go next? Some things I'm asking myself, I'm thinking about where do I need more, sorry, this phone stand shadow is a little rough. I'm thinking about where do I want more definition, so like I wanted a little bit more in there. I think I'm going to go to these bold vein lines now, and for that I am going to mainly use black or gray, like an ivory, but I think it'd be really nice to have a little bit of a purpley tone to it. Just for me, I love visually interesting, vibrant pieces, and so having just a little bit more of like a deep purple instead of just straight black I think would be great, but you can use whatever color you want here. It's just been this revolving puddle, little French ultramarine, little opera, little ivory, and then this puddle can kind of ebb and flow while I paint. Again, I'm fully rolling my brush in that, and I'm going to go over my bold lines here. I call them veins. I don't necessarily know if that's what they are technically. I find that a dark purple is also a little bit less harsh than just straight black. Could be almost distracting in a sense, so I like working with other colors I've already used. So I've already used dark purple in a few areas. I think this will be great. And I'm just using the tip of my brush, holding it at almost a 90-degree angle, and I find that when I'm doing fine lines, a big trick is to use as light of a pressure as you can manage. So I'm trying to not push too hard, just barely skimming my brush against the paper. I also find that painting a little bit larger can be helpful if you're worried about fine lines, because if you think about it, if you're painting large, a fine line isn't that small. But if you're always trying to only work on, like, let's say a 5x7, your fine lines really do have to be quite small. That sounds self-explanatory, but sometimes I think folks want to paint small in the beginning. They're kind of stressed to paint larger. So don't be afraid to paint a little bit bigger. Granted, this is only 8x10, but still a little bit bigger. So I'm gonna keep working with that same technique. I have my dark purpley puddle. If you can see the way that the light is kind of hitting this, it's still wet. I try to point out, even though I'm painting excuse me, in a more detailed way, I still have quite a bit of water on my brush. Watercolor needs water to look visually interesting, to dry properly. So even though I'm painting detail, I still have quite a bit of water on my brush. I'm not a perfectionist when it comes to paintings. I like that my paintings feel like paintings as opposed to, let's say, you know, a photograph. I'm okay with them being a little imperfect, being handmade. I like the look of that. I'm drawn to other people's work that's more semi-abstract. So keeping that in mind and thinking of my personal style, I'm not really overly stressed about, you know, my lines being perfect. Like that one got a little bit thicker. Just curving these up to the top. And I sketched these in earlier with my pencil. I like to plan my shape and composition more with the pencil, and then while I'm painting, I can just enjoy the process of painting. I'm just trusting my pencil lines. I'm not overthinking exactly where these all go. Starting to get some interesting detail there. I might take a little bit of this purple. I notice in the Moth, there's kind of darker tones here, so I'm just gonna sketch these in. And then I ask myself in my head questions like, do I like how bold of lines those are? I think not necessarily, I like it, but I think I wanna just blur them just a touch. So I'm pretty happy with that. I feel like it's similar to the photo reference. I just want to do a few more touches and then we'll call it good and finish with white highlights. One more thing I do want to do is take a little bit of my pink from earlier. And if you see in the photo reference, there are these little veins down here that visually connect all the way down. So for example, this black line kind of keeps coming down, but it turns pink. So coming from here and then curving down. So these aren't perfectly vertical lines. They have a bit of a curve to them. And that will just flow in with the pink from earlier. Again, using a bit of a light pressure here. I'm not pushing super hard, so I do get a pretty fine line. I do like that a lot. All right, I think I'm going to call it good. I'm going to blow dry one final time, add some white highlights and any other little details we might need, but we're almost there. All right, so I blow dried this and here is where we're at. I really like the way that it's looking and I'm excited to add some highlights and some details. So for me, I love a good white highlight. I shake this really well. And this is again acrylic white ink. If you have white gouache or a white pen or white acrylic, I even have these white Sharpies I've gotten before. I personally like to use a brush. It feels more painterly. I like that I can do things like I could splatter with it. I could just, I don't know, I feel like I can do more with the white and it's more opaque. So without any water on my brush, make sure it's kind of dry. I'm getting a little bit of white here, rolling my brush in it. And I'm just gonna look for any part of the painting that I do want some detail, or I want maybe just to separate in a sense. So for example, I hold my brush tightly and I'm just gonna come in here and add outlines. And this is just my style. Again, I think I mentioned at the beginning of the video, anytime you take a class or watch someone's video, you're always going to see their style shine through, and I think that's wonderful, but I also know that, or I want to encourage people to find their own style. So if you don't love the white outlines, you can skip it. This is a chance where you can make things your own. You could maybe even use black pen and you can maybe outline in black. Like if you have a shaky hand and you think, oh, I'm not going to be able to do that, pen is helpful if you have a hard time with fine lines. But again, this just works well for me. So I'm coming in, and because it's my style, I like to outline almost everything in white. So I'm just coming in here, giving it a nice crisp outline. Again, I'm not watering down this paint at all. It's just an acrylic ink. It doesn't need water. In fact, if you did add water, it might turn less opaque, and I want it that bold white. So I'm giving that an outline. Because I don't have a background color, I'm not necessarily outlining the whole thing. Just outlining where multiple colors are coming together, like in between the shadows, or maybe this top line. To be totally honest, at this point in my paintings, I don't look at my photo reference anymore. I probably should, but I find that for me, it can be, I can lose some of the creativity if I'm just focused on a photo reference. So again, for me right now, I'm just thinking about my painting. What do I want my painting to look like? I love these crisp lines, so there aren't any white lines here on the moth in real life, and I know that, but I like the way that it looks. So again, just encouraging you to, especially at the end of your painting, just make things your own. Maybe you're envisioning this moth with some, you know, blue somewhere, or more bold lines, whatever you want. You can kind of make it your own. I'm not sure if I want to outline every vein or if it might be too busy. So instead of just doing it, I'm going to just jump around a little bit and outline other areas of the painting, step back, see if it needs it, and then I might go back in like where these black lines are and do white next to it. But first, I'm just going to, I did an outline around there, and I'm going to kind of keep it a little simple. Maybe add a bit of an outline to this smaller shape. I hold my brush quite a bit tighter when I'm doing detail, if you can see the way that my hand looks. So I encourage you to pay attention to how you hold your brush. I think it makes a big difference. Like for me, I'm working in a more detailed way, so I'm kind of holding my brush tighter, and I'm going to come in here with some downward brush strokes. I like that the moth looks kind of fluffy or feathery at this part of the body, so I'm just reinforcing that idea with those brush strokes. Also notice how I turn my paper a lot. It's not just for recording, but it's for my wrist, whatever is comfortable for my wrist, and the angle that works well for me while I'm painting. So if it makes it kind of confusing while you're watching, I do apologize, but that is just what I find helpful. Like this, I think it's awkward to come in here and turn my wrist around, so instead I'm going to turn my paper upside down and do that. So I should mention, as I'm getting to the end of this, this will be my first official YouTube video, and I would, of course, appreciate if anyone has gotten this far that you subscribe. I plan on uploading a lot more often, doing a lot more images. I paint a lot of different subject matter, so I'll do landscapes, I'll do people, and if you are interested, please feel free to request something, maybe a certain technique that you'd like to know how to do, or a certain subject matter. So to make this look like it's folded, almost like a ribbon, I'm coming in here and just crossing over like this, so it looks folded. And I go back and pick up white often because I want to have quite a lot of white on my brush at a time. Reinforcing shapes that I want in my painting, like kind of curving shapes down this section with little downward brush strokes. It's really fun getting to add more details at this point. So I'm going to come in and continue to outline here. Quite a bit of white on my brush. Light pressure, and I'm just dragging that around. And the white is permanent, so I definitely recommend adding this at the end because I can't paint watercolor on top of this white. It's an acrylic base. I'm also going to link all of these products I'm using with Blick. I do have an affiliate link, so if you do shop through that link, it is helpful for me to get a little bit back. All right, so there we go. We've outlined most of it. And now I'm just stepping back, asking myself if I want to add more. Will it be too busy to add more? Part of me wants to just add a few dots. Technically, this moth doesn't have these dots, but I think that they would look nice to give a little bit more interest, some smaller shapes. I feel like it's lacking small shapes, if that makes sense. Like I have a lot of blurring, I have some fine lines, but I just want something smaller to move your eye across the painting. I love little touches like that. Let me just suggest a bit more detail, a little bit more lines in the wings. I might do some downward brush strokes. If you're wondering, well, why the heck is she adding all of this? Sometimes it's just like intuition. Once you paint for a long time, you'll think, okay, what should I add here? What would give it some interest? So I did some downward brush strokes just to give a little bit more shape to the wings. I'm pretty happy with that. And now it's just hard to decide if I want to do any more to the wings, but I think I might leave it. One thing I think would be nice though, I'm going to take a bit more, slightly darker of my shadow colors, a little bit more of this gray tone. And I just want a little bit more darkness in my shadows. Sometimes shadows are darker at the base and then they blend out. So I'm going to take a little bit slightly darker shadow, and right under that acrylic line, I'm just going to add a little bit of black here and there. And you can either leave it darker or you can blend it out. But sometimes for my shadows, I like to just go a little bit more bold. I'm just softening that edge with just water. So here's water, just kind of softening. Dried on me a little bit. I have a fan, so I think that it's drying my colors a little bit quicker than normal. But see how it's just really making that shadow, I think, pop even more. And you could make more of this dramatic shadow in the beginning, but I really like the concept of less is more with watercolor. It doesn't hurt. You can always add more to it. You can't really take it away, so it doesn't hurt to add something like this later on. Just going a little bit more bold, blurring it out, so I get more of like an ombre or blended effect in my shadow. And that's about it. Just going to add a little bit more of that over here, and I'm not doing it everywhere either, I should mention, so it's not too distracting. All right, thanks for joining me, and let me know what you think down below.